13. He bought a bed for their empty flat. They had no money yet for other furniture, and threw himself into his work with the frenzy of a man of 40 beginning a new life. He made several telephone calls to Geneva. A show of Sabina's work had opened there by chance a week after the Russian invasion, and in a wave of sympathy for her tiny country, Geneva's patrons of the arts bought up all her paintings. Thanks to the Russians, I am a rich woman, she said, laughing into the telephone. She invited Tomasz to come and see her new studio and assured him it did not differ greatly from the one he had known in Prague. He would have been only too glad to visit her, but was unable to find an excuse to explain his absence to Teresa, and so Sabina came to Zurich. She stayed at a hotel. Tomasz went to see her after work. He phoned first from the reception desk, then went upstairs. When she opened the door, she stood before him on her beautiful long legs, wearing nothing but panties and bra, and a black bowler hat. She stood there staring, mute and motionless. Tomasz did the same. Suddenly he realized how touched he was. He removed the bowler from her head and placed it on the bedside table. Then they made love without saying a word. Leaving the hotel for his flat, which by now had acquired table, chairs, couch, and carpet, he thought happily that he carried his way of living with him as a snail carries his house. Teresa and Sabina represented the two poles of his life, separate and irreconcilable, yet equally appealing. But the fact that he carried his life support system with him everywhere like a part of his body meant that Teresa went on having dreams. They had been in Zurich for 6 or 7 months when he came home late one evening to find a letter on the table telling him she had left for Prague. She had left because she lacked the strength to live abroad. She knew she was supposed to bolster him up, but did not know how to go about it. She had been silly enough to think that going abroad would change her. She thought that after what she had been through during the invasion, she would stop being petty and grow wise and strong, but she had overestimated herself. She was weighing him down and would do so no longer. She had drawn the necessary conclusions before it was too late, and she apologized for taking Karenin with her. He took some sleeping pills but did not close his eyes until morning. Luckily it was Saturday and he could stay at home. For the 150th time he went over the situation. The borders between his country and the rest of the world were no longer open. No telegrams or telephone calls could bring her back. The authorities would never let her travel abroad. Her departure was staggeringly definitive. 14. The realization that he was utterly powerless was like the blow of a sledgehammer, yet it was curiously calming as well. No one was forcing him into a decision. He felt no need to stare at the walls of the houses across the courtyard and ponder whether to live with her or not. Teresa had made the decision herself. He went to a restaurant for lunch. He was depressed, but as he ate, his original desperation waned, lost its strength, and soon all that was left was melancholy. Looking back on the years he had spent with her, he came to feel that their story could have had no better ending. If someone had invented the story, this is how he would have had it to end. One day, Teresa came to him uninvited. One day, she left the same way. She came with a heavy suitcase. She left with a heavy suitcase. He paid the bill, left the restaurant, and started walking through the streets, his melancholy growing more and more beautiful. He had spent 7 years of his life with Teresa, and now he realized that those years were more attractive in retrospect than they were when he was living with them. His love for Teresa was beautiful, but it was also tiring. He had constantly had to hide things from her, sham, dissemble, make amends, buck her up, calm her down, give her evidence of his feelings, play the defendant to her jealousy, her suffering, and her dreams, feel guilty, make excuses and apologies. Now what was tiring had disappeared, and only the beauty remained. Saturday found him for the first time strolling alone through Zurich, breathing in the heady smell of his freedom. New adventures hid around each corner. The future was again a secret. He was on his way back to the bachelor life, the life he had once felt destined for, the life that would let him be what he actually was. For 7 years he had lived bound to her, his every step subject to her scrutiny. She might as well have chained iron balls to his ankles. Suddenly his step was much lighter. He soared. He had entered Parmenides' magic field. He was enjoying the sweet lightness of being. Did he feel like phoning Sabina in Geneva, contacting one or another of the women he had met during his several months in Zurich? No, not in the least. Perhaps he sensed that any woman would make his memory of Teresa unbearably painful. 15. The curious melancholic fascination lasted until Sunday evening. On Monday, everything changed. Teresa forced her way into his thoughts. He imagined her sitting there writing her farewell letter. He felt her hands trembling. He saw her lugging her heavy suitcase in one hand and leading Kiernan on his leash with the other. He pictured her unblocking their Prague flat and suffered the utter abandonment, breathing her in the face as she opened the door. During those 2 beautiful days of melancholy, his compassion, that curse of emotional telepathy, had taken a holiday. It had slept the sound Sunday sleep of a miner who, after a hard week's work, needs to gather strength for his Monday shift. Instead of the patients he was treating, Tomasz saw Teresa. He tried to remind himself, "Don't think about her. Don't think about her." He said to himself, "I'm sick with compassion. It's good that she's gone and that I'll never see her again. Though it's not Teresa I need to be free of. It's that sickness, compassion, which I thought was immune to until she infected me with it." On Saturday and Sunday he felt the sweet lightness of being rise up to him out of the depths of the future. On Monday he was hit by a weight the likes of which he had never known. The tons of steel of the Russian tanks were nothing compared with it, for there is nothing heavier than compassion. Not even one's own pain weighs so heavy as the pain one feels with someone, for someone, a pain intensified by the imagination and prolonged by 100 echoes. He kept warning himself not to give in to compassion, and compassion listened with bowed head and a seemingly guilty conscience. Compassion knew it was being presumptuous, yet it quietly stood its ground, and on the 5th day after her departure, Tomasz informed the director of his hospital, the man who had phoned him daily in Prague after the Russian invasion, that he had to return at once. He was ashamed. He knew that the move would appear irresponsible, inexcusable to the man. He thought to unbosom himself and tell the story of Teresa and the letter she had left on the table for him. But in the end he did not. From the Swiss doctor's point of view, Teresa's move could only appear hysterical and abhorrent, and Tomasz refused to allow anyone an opportunity to think ill of her. The director of the hospital was in fact offended. Tomasz shrugged his shoulders and said, "Es muss sein. Es muss sein." It was an illusion. The last movement of Beethoven's last quartet is based on the following 2 motifs. Must it be? It must be. It must be. To make the meaning of the words absolutely clear, Beethoven introduced the movement with the phrase, "Der schwer gefasste Entschluss," which is commonly translated as "the difficult resolution." This allusion to Beethoven was actually Tomash's first step back to Teresa because she was the one who had induced him to buy records of the Beethoven quartets and sonatas. The allusion was even more pertinent than he had thought because the Swiss doctor was a great music lover. Smiling serenely, he asked, in the melody of Beethoven's motive, "Muss es sein?" "Ja, es muss sein," Tomasz said again. 16. Unlike Parmenides, Beethoven apparently viewed weight as something positive. Since the German word schwer means both difficult and heavy, Beethoven's difficult resolution may be constructed as a heavy or weighty resolution. The weighty resolution is at the one with the voice of fate. Es muss sein. Necessity, weight, and value are three concepts inextricably bound. Only necessity is heavy, and only what is heavy has value. This is a conviction born of Beethoven's music, and although we cannot ignore the possibility, or even probability, that it owes its origins more to Beethoven's commentators than to Beethoven himself, we all more or less share it. We believe that the greatness of man stems from the fact that he bears his fate as Atlas bore the heavens on his shoulders. Beethoven's hero is a lifter of metaphysical weights. Tomasz approached the Swiss border. I imagine a gloomy, shock-headed Beethoven in person conducting the local firemen's brass band in a farewell to emigration, an Es muss sein march. Then Tomasz crossed the Czech border and was welcomed by columns of Russian tanks. He had to stop his car and wait half an hour before they passed. A terrifying soldier in the black uniform of the armed forces stood at the crossroads directing traffic as if every road in the country belonged to him and him alone. Es muss sein. Tomasz repeated to himself, but then he began to doubt. Did it really have to be? Yes, it was unbearable for him to stay in Zurich imagining Teresa living on her own in Prague. But how long would he have been tortured by compassion? All his life? A year? Or a month? Or only a week? How could he have known? How could he have gauged it? Any schoolboy can do experiments in the physics laboratory to test various scientific hypotheses, but man, because he has only one life to live, cannot conduct experiments to test whether to follow his passion, compassion, or not. It was with these thoughts in mind that he opened the door to his flat. Karenin made the homecoming easier by jumping up on him and licking his face. The desire to fall into Teresa's arms, he could still feel it while getting into his car in Zurich, had completely disintegrated. He fancied himself standing opposite her in the midst of a snowy plain, the two of them shivering from the cold. 17. From the very beginning of the occupation, Russian military airplanes had flown over Prague all night long. Tomasz, no longer accustomed to the noise, was unable to fall asleep. Twisting and turning beside the slumbering Teresa, he recalled something she had told him a long time before in the course of an insignificant conversation. They had been talking about his friend Z, when she had announced, "If I hadn't met you, I'd certainly have fallen in love with him." Even then, her words had left Tomasz in a strange state of melancholy, and now he realized it was only a matter of chance that Teresa loved him and not his friend Z. Apart from her consummated love for Tomasz, there was in the realm of possibility an infinite number of unconsummated loves for other men. We all reject out of hand the idea that love of our life may be something light or weightless. We presume our love is what must be, that without it our life would no longer be the same. we feel that Beethoven himself, gloomy and awe-inspiring, is playing the Esmus sign to our own great love. Tomasz often thought of Teresa's remark about his friend Z, and came to the conclusion that the love story of his life exemplified not Esmus sign it must be, but rather Es konnte auch anders sein. It could just as well be otherwise. 7 years earlier, a complex neurological case happened to have been discovered at the hospital in Teresa's town. They called in the chief surgeon of Tomasz's hospital in Prague for consultation, but the chief surgeon of Tomasz's hospital happened to be suffering from sciatica, and because he could not move, he sent Tomasz to the provincial hospital in his place. The town had several hotels, but Tomasz happened to be given a room in the one where Teresa was employed. He happened to have had enough free time before his train left to stop at the hotel restaurant. Teresa happened to be on duty and happened to be serving Tomasz's table. It had taken 6 chance happenings to push Tomasz towards Teresa, as if he had little inclination to go to her on his own. He had gone back to Prague because of her. So faithful a decision resting on so fortuitous a love that would not even have existed had it not been for the chief surgeon's sciatica 7 years earlier. And that woman, that personification of absolute fortuity, now again lay asleep beside him, breathing deeply. It was late at night. His stomach started acting up, as it tended to do in times of psychic stress. Once or twice her breathing turned into mild snores. Tomasz felt no compassion. All he felt was the pressure in his stomach and the despair of having returned.